to the deep dive. Today, we're opening up a really fascinating, maybe slightly disturbing stack of sources. We're looking at what you could call the architecture of control.
That's right. We know you, our listener, are curious about this idea of, well, human programmability. How easily can people, or even whole societies, be sort of steered towards certain outcomes?
Yeah, that's a big question, especially now. So we've gathered research from, well, all over the place, cutting-edge biology like epigenetics, but also psychological warfare history, surveillance tech. Quite a mix.
The mission today is to pull out the key ideas, see how these modern systems, political, economic tech, how they don't just nudge us, but actually tap into our, deepest biological wiring, our emotions.
How does that whole feedback loop work? The one that potentially turns, an individual into a predictable part of a larger machine.
So the core question is really, what makes someone programmable? And what we're seeing in these sources is it's not just one thing. It's more like a cascade.
A cascade, okay.
Yeah, starting with maybe our biology, this inherited anxiety we'll talk about. Then moving up to the psychological level, how fear and even memory can be, well, hacked.
Hacked. Wow.
Yeah. And then finally, looking at the big picture, the societal structures, the digital systems that track and predict and ultimately govern us, treating us less like individuals and more like data points. The sources call them dividuals.
Dividuals. Okay, that's a new one. Let's start at the beginning then. The biological blueprint.
Okay.
Okay, so epigenetics. When you say programming, people usually think computers or maybe propaganda. But these sources jump straight to biology, suggesting we can literally inherit a tendency to be steered. So what is epigenetics exactly?
Right. So epigenetics, basically, it's about these markers, sometimes called big proteins, that sit on top of your genes, sort of above the genome.
Okay, above it, not changing the DNA itself.
Exactly. That's the crucial bit. It's not altering the DNA sequence of the actual code. It's changing the instructions, like the software that tells the hardware the genes if they should turn on or how much.
So our experiences, trauma, environment, stress, they can rewrite the operating instruction.
Precisely. Without ever touching the underlying DNA code. That's why it's so powerful.
Yeah.
It means the environment isn't just shaping how we feel, it's potentially changing the biological settings for the next generation.
And the speed this happens is, well, it's kind of shocking. There's that famous mouse study, right, that showed just how fast this can be passed down.
Oh, yeah. That study's foundational. It really nails down how quickly this biological programming can happen. So researchers took an adult male mouse. They exposed him to a smell, almond, I think it was, which is normally neutral.
Just a smell.
Right. But they paired that smell with a trauma, a mild foot shock. Did this over a few days. So the mouse learned almond smell equals danger coming.
Okay, classic conditioning. But the key part is this was before he had any offspring.
Exactly. Before he ever bred. So the mother's contribution biologically wasn't part of this specific inheritance pathway they were testing.
Right. So what happened to the kids?
Well, when they bred this conditioned male, the next generations, his direct offspring and their offspring too, they showed a real, measurable biological change. They were born with more neurons in their noses and brains that reacted specifically to that almond smell.
Wow. Not just general anxiety, but a physical inherited sensitivity to the specific thing the father was traumatized by.
Exactly. It's hyper-specific. This isn't just standard genetics. It's like inheriting a learned defense mechanism.
Yeah.
And the sources suggest it's passed down through the male line, in this case.
How does a temporary experience in the father change the sperm permanently? That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but the mechanism they propose is fascinating. It involves something called the epigenetic payload. See, sperm isn't just DNA. It carries this cloud of messenger RNA and other molecules, the epigenesome, around the genetic material.
Like extra information packets.
Sort of, yeah. When the male mouse had that trauma, the stress signals triggered changes in these RNA molecules, which then got packaged into the sperm. They're like little notes telling the embryo as it develops, hey, that almond smell, pay attention, it's dangerous.
That is incredibly efficient. A threat appears, and within one generation, like 6 weeks for a mouse, the offspring are biologically primed for it.
Super efficient. But here's the twist, the paradox. This is meant to be adaptive, right, to help survival. Offspring are born ready for a real danger.
Makes sense.
But what if the danger goes away? What if the environment stabilizes and that almond smell is just a smell again? That hypersensitivity doesn't just switch off.
So they're left biologically geared up for a fight that isn't coming.
Exactly. You're left with this hypersensitized survival system.
Yeah.
Biologically prone to anxiety, chronic fear, always scanning for a threat that isn't there anymore. This is where it becomes, as the sources say, a maladaptive vulnerability.
And this isn't just mice. The sources connect this to human history, like the Dutch hunger winter.
Yes, absolutely. That was a horrific man-made famine in 1944-45. Very acute, sustained stress.
And the children conceived or developing during that time?
Decades later, studies showed they, and sometimes even their children, had significantly higher rates of stress-related problems. Hypertension, obesity, even things like schizophrenia seem more prevalent. The mother's trauma appears to have altered the stress response settings in the developing fetus.
So the big takeaway for understanding this programmability idea is that major stress, especially man-made trauma, doesn't just leave psychological scars. It creates a biological bedrock of anxiety.
Right. A population that's already biologically on high alert, maybe from historical or ongoing stressors, is potentially much easier to steer using fear. You don't always need to create a brand new fear. You just have to trigger the survival system that's already humming in the background.
It lays the groundwork.
Okay, so you've got this potential biological baseline of readiness for fear. The next layer in this architecture of control is the psychological override. And fear. Fear is the weapon of choice here. It just instantly torpedoes our ability to think straight.
It's the ultimate off switch for rationality, isn't it? The sources say when you're gripped by fear, read the higher parts of your brain, the prefrontal cortex.
Yeah, the bit responsible for planning, judgment, complex thought.
It just shuts down instantly.
And it's physical. It's not just a metaphor. Stress hormones like cortisol flood your system. And if that anxiety is chronic, constant stress, it can literally shrink the prefrontal cortex over time, while the amygdala, the brain's primitive fear center, actually gets bigger, more reactive.
So you physically lose the capacity for higher thought. What does that mean in practice? What happens when the brain becomes this stress reaction active machine?
Well, you lose nuance.
Yeah.
You lose the ability to assess complex situations, to plan long-term, to see context. Your brain just defaults to this, well, almost reptilian survival mode, fight or flight.
Focused only on the immediate threat.
Exactly. All about neutralizing the danger right now. You can't analyze subtle arguments, you just react. And that state makes people incredibly vulnerable. They become, as one source puts it, easily manipulated by anyone that promises safety from the threat. It doesn't matter if the promise is logical or even true.
And this isn't some new discovery for political strategy. The sources are clear. Ruling classes have known this for ages. They've actively worked to artificially maintain fear. Because, simply put, a fearful population is easier to control than a fearless one.
A fearful mind also snacks back to tribal thinking, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's another biological shortcut safety in the group.
Right. You seek safety with your people.
And when that happens, the individual often subordinates self-analysis and a discerning search for the truth in favor of maintaining group interests and cohesion. Belonging becomes more important than objective reality.
And once you've surrendered that critical thinking to the group, your own personal history, your memories, they become surprisingly vulnerable, too, this idea of hacking autobiographical memory.
It's frankly terrifying. The sources state it's very easy to distort memories or insert small, false memories. Think about that. If your sense of self is built on your past experiences and those memories can be warped, then you can be warped.
Okay, let's slow down here because this sounds like science fiction. The study you mentioned, 70% of people convinced they committed a serious crime that never happened. How on earth did they do that?
It wasn't like hypnosis or anything dramatic. It was more insidious. It relied on basic human psychology. First, building trust, rapport. Then using leading questions. But the key was suggestion, often implying that someone else, like a family member, remembered the event.
So they'd say something like, your mom mentioned you got into some trouble around age 14.
Exactly. And the person starts searching their memory. They maybe find some vague feelings or unrelated fragments from that time. Then the researcher gently feeds suggestive details, maybe weaves in some true details from the person's life to make it plausible. And the brain, well, it's not a perfect recording device. It's more like a storyteller. It tries to make sense of the suggestions, and it can literally construct a false memory that feels real.
70%. The implication is huge. Could a government or any powerful group with control of media essentially mass gaslight a population over time, implanting or twisting collective memories through sheer repetition and authority?
That's the disturbing possibility these sources raise. You think you remember the last few years one way, but if the dominant narrative pushed constantly through news, social media, official statements, tells a different story. Over time, many people might unconsciously adjust their own memories to align with the group narrative.
And it's not just theoretical manipulation. There are examples of very targeted psychological warfare. The Paul Bennewitz case. That one's chilling.
It really is. This was back in the 70s and 80s. Bennewitz was a civilian physicist observing what he believed were secret government aircraft near an Air Force base.
And instead of just telling him to stop or prosecuting him,
The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, the OSI, and reportedly the NSA, launched this incredibly elaborate disinformation campaign specifically against him. They didn't just want to silence him. They wanted to destroy his credibility by making him seem crazy.
how? What did they actually do?
It sounds unbelievable. They apparently beamed fake alien transmissions right into his house. They tampered with his computer, his equipment, feeding him doctor data, false signals, all designed to convince him that what he was seeing wasn't secret U.S. tech, but hostile aliens.
They manufactured an entire false reality just for him. Alien abduction narratives, the works.
Yes. They didn't just hide the truth. They actively built a terrifying, personalized delusion around him. And it worked. It literally destroyed his life. He ended up in psychiatric institutions. It's a stark example of the lengths these structures might go to, not just to conceal, but to actively rewrite reality for an individual to neutralize them.
Which inevitably brings us to the shadow in the background of all this. Project MKUltra, the CIA's infamous program.
Right. MKUltra's documented goal was explicitly about mind control, trying to control and even reprogram people's minds. They experimented with potent drugs like LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock, often on people who had no idea they were subjects.
Unwitting subjects, they were trying to create what? Programmable assassins? Manchurian candidates?
That was the extreme end of the ambition, yes. Be programmed to act, maybe even kill, without memory or conscience. Now, the official line is that MKUltra failed in those extreme goals and was shut down. But the fact that they even tried, the underlying belief that the mind could be wiped and reprogrammed, that sets a really important historical context for everything we're discussing. So we have these potential biological vulnerabilities, these psychological weak points like fear and memory malleability. But these aren't just left to random chance. They're actively managed, exploited at a societal level through deliberate strategies, division, and ideological subversion.
This taps into group psychology, right? Edward Bernays, the sort of father of PR, he figured this out early on.
He absolutely did. Bernays saw that when people identify strongly with a group, their individual critical thinking just tanks. He famously said a group has no critical faculty.
Because the individual instinct is to belong, to conform.
Exactly. The individual subordinates self-analysis and a discerning search for the truth in favor of maintaining group interests and cohesion. If the group says jump, you ask how high, because fitting in feels safer than thinking for yourself and risking isolation. And this, Bernays realized, makes populations susceptible to what he called invisible government manipulation through appealing to these unconscious group motives.
And the easiest way to manage groups is to make sure they don't unite against you. The classic, divide and conquer.
It's the oldest play in the book. Machiavelli knew it centuries ago. A population united is always stronger than those who rule over it.
So if you're in power, you want division.
You actively cultivate it. Power structures, according to these sources, deliberately push divisions along any fault line they can find: race, class, religion, gender, or political preference. The aim is constant friction, noise, internal conflict.
Keep everyone fighting each other.
Yes. So that rational discussion across group lines becomes extremely unlikely. It weakens the population as a whole, keeps them distracted, and crucially, diverts attention away from the real levers of power, the invisible government operating behind the curtain.
And this division isn't just political or cultural, it's deeply tied into economics too, specifically through manipulating the idea of the middle class.
Right. The concept of the middle class, which we often think of as a sign of a healthy society, can be, according to some of these analyses, strategically deployed to suppress class consciousness.
Suppress class consciousness. How does that work? I mean, isn't identifying as middle class just descriptive?
Well, class consciousness is traditionally about workers recognizing their shared economic interests against the owners of capital. By promoting this aspirational, idealized middle-class position, even for people who are actually struggling financially, you get them to identify upwards with an ideal rather than sideways with fellow workers.
So instead of seeing common cause with other struggling people, they identify with a goal, a status, even if they haven't reached it, and they defend that status.
Precisely. It redirects resentment. Instead of anger flowing upwards towards systemic economic issues, It gets deflected downwards or sideways towards other groups, scapegoats, immigrants, whoever, is perceived as threatening that fragile middle-class identity.
It breaks solidarity.
It absolutely does. And this feeds directly into how identity politics can be weaponized today. Sources argue that capitalism, or powerful interests within it, can use identity politics to fragment solidarity further by getting people to squabble over privilege, focusing intensely on who has more or less based on group identity.
You keep them from uniting over shared economic problems like low wages or lack of health care, which affect everyone outside the elite.
Exactly. It consumes vast amounts of energy that could otherwise be directed at challenging the fundamental economic structures. And the political right, these sources note, often taps into this by twisting legitimate class grievances into identitarian resentment, making it about cultural threats rather than universal economic rights. The end result is a fractured, distracted population, unable to build broad-based movements.
It sounds very deliberate, very strategic, and there's actually a model for this kind of societal takedown, isn't there? The 4 stages of ideological subversion.
Yes, this model, often attributed to analysts of Cold War ideological conflict, lays out a chillingly methodical process for collapsing a target society from within. It's not quick, it's a long game.
Okay, what's the first stage?
Stage 1 is demoralization, and this takes time, 15 to 20 years roughly. Why so long? Because that's about how long it takes to educate one generation into a different ideology, to erode the existing values, morals, patriotism.
And what does a demoralized society look like?
The key outcome is that people become unable to assess true information. Facts lose their meaning. Truth and lies become indistinguishable. People don't trust institutions, they don't trust each other. Historical narratives get rewritten or discarded. Once you've softened up the target like that, you move to stage 2.
Which is destabilization.
Faster, right?
Much faster. 2 to 5 years, typically. Now you actively attack the essential functions of the society, the economy, foreign relations, defense systems, law and order. You ramp up conflict, polarization. This is when, according to the model, sleepers, agents, or highly influenced individuals might become prominent, pushing agendas that accelerate the chaos.
So things start visibly falling apart, leading to stage 3, crisis.
Right. The crisis is the breaking point. Social structures crumble, legitimate government loses control. This is when you might see a brief, violent power struggle. And it often leads to calls for a strong hand, someone to restore order, even if it means authoritarianism. Or maybe outside forces intervene.
And then, ironically, comes stage 4, normalization. Yes, the new power, whoever seized control during the crisis, stabilizes the country, often using force. But here's the really cynical part. They frequently turn on and eliminate the very radicals, the idealists, the useful idiots who help bring them to power.
Because the revolution needs to end.
Exactly. The goal was takeover, not perpetual revolution. Now they need stability, obedience. So the tools of subversion are put away, and a new, often much more rigid form of control is locked into place. Okay, so we've seen the biological priming, the psychological manipulation, the societal division. All these methods are now being amplified and managed by this final layer, the digital architecture of control. We're moving, as some philosophers put it, from disciplinary societies, think prisons, factories, and closed spaces.
Where power needed walls.
Right. To what these sources call societies of control, where power doesn't need walls anymore because it's diffused everywhere. It expands and permeates the entirety of society. It's in the air, almost.
How does that work? If there are no walls, how are we controlled?
Because the tools of control are disguised as tools of freedom or convenience. Your smartphone, your credit card, social media, smart home devices, even those DNA ancestry tests.
Things we choose to use.
Exactly. They are no longer perceived as methods of control at all, but rather as exercises of your own freedom. But every interaction, every click, swipe, search generates data. Data that is constantly harvested, aggregated, analyzed. The surveillance is pervasive precisely because we volunteer for it.
And this sees us, right? We're not individuals anymore.
Correct. The term the sources use is dividuals. It means we're no longer seen as indivisible, unique persons. Instead, we're broken down into statistical components. Demographics, marketing samples, survey results, statistics.
So I'm not me. I'm my credit score, my engagement metrics, my political leaning score.
Essentially, yes. To the system, you are the sum of your data points. It doesn't need to understand your inner life. It just needs to map your patterns, your probabilities. You become a dividual, a profile to be managed.
How does swiping a credit card actually turn me into a dividual? What's the shift there?
Okay, so the individual may be unpredictable. The dividual is a collection of data points that can be compared to other collections. When you use your card, you're not just buying coffee. You're generating data that slots you into categories. spending habits, location patterns, consumer preferences. This aggregated data defines your individual profile, which is then used to predict your future behavior, assess your risk, target you with ads, or maybe flag you for other reasons. The system governs the pattern, not the person.
And the main place this pattern governance happens now is online, in the attention economy.
Absolutely. Big tech platforms, as the sources state, literally steer what a billion people are thinking today.
Right.
And how. Their algorithms aren't optimized for truth or understanding, they're optimized for engagement.
Which often means outrage.
Outrage, strong emotions, repetition, whatever keeps you scrolling, clicking, reacting. This creates a constant state of fragmented attention, jumping from one stimulus to the next. And that actively prevents the kind of sustained group consciousness needed to actually analyze and challenge complex systems.
It's the ultimate digital divide and conquer. Keep everyone agitated and focused on small, algorithmically served fragments so they never see the whole picture or organize effectively.
Highly personalized, highly efficient. But this goes beyond just steering attention. We're moving into automated predictive control. Systems like Gorgon Stare.
Gorgon Stare sounds ominous, like the myth.
It's based on real military surveillance tech. Think wide aerial surveillance, drones or planes that can monitor an entire city, continuously record everything happening below, track all movement, and even rewind the footage to see how events unfolded.
Constant, total visual coverage.
And that massive stream of visual and other data gets fed into incredibly powerful AI systems. Palantir is the name that comes up repeatedly in these discussions.
Palantir, yeah. Known for its data integration and analysis, used by intelligence agencies, police forces.
Right. These systems ingest everything, perform advanced analytics and pattern recognition on a scale never before possible. They correlate data from everywhere: online activity, financial transactions, location data, surveillance footage.
Not just analyzing the past, but predicting the future.
That's the goal. Predictive capabilities to anticipate unrest, dissent, individual actions before they even happen. It creates what one source calls a constant predictive automated gaze. Just the knowledge that this unfeeling algorithmic eye is watching and potentially predicting your next move subtly changes how people behave. You start to self-censor, self-regulate.
You're being governed by the anticipation of the algorithm. Which brings us to Stafford Beer and cybernetics. How does his work on systems and government failure fit in here? It seems relevant.
Hugely relevant. Beer studied control systems, basically how complex organizations manage themselves. And he saw a fundamental flaw in how governments operate. They base decisions on massively outdated models of reality.
Because the data takes so long to collect and process?
Exactly. There's a huge time lag.
Yeah.
By the time the statistics are gathered and analyzed, the situation on the ground, the economy, public mood, whatever, has already changed. So the government is constantly reacting to yesterday's problems. Beer said this delay causes them to do exactly the wrong thing most of the time during rapid changes.
It's like trying to steer a supertanker with a rowing boat paddle, looking backwards.
A perfect analogy. Beer talked about variety, the immense complexity and unpredictability of the real world, of human behavior. Governments try to manage this variety using filters, what he called variety attenuators, laws, regulations, bureaucratic procedures, media narratives.
Things that simplify reality to make it manageable.
Supposedly. But Beer argued the system fails because, first, the bureaucracy itself becomes self-serving, focused on its own rules and survival, not on responding effectively. And second, decisions get made at the wrong levels of recursion, too high up, too disconnected from the local reality where the actual variety exists.
So the people making policy are using old data and generalized models that don't match the complexity on the ground, leading to ineffective, often.
And Beer's point wasn't just that the system is inefficient, it's that this inefficiency itself becomes a form of control. A rigid, slow, unresponsive system inherently limits freedom and adaptability, even if that wasn't the conscious intention. He argued you need radical decentralization, not just tinkering, to make systems truly responsive and empowering.
Wow. Okay, that has been an incredibly dense and, yeah, pretty sobering look at this whole architecture. From the genes up to the algorithms, the picture that emerges is, well, this idea of human programmability isn't just one thing. It's rooted in potentially inherited biological anxiety.
Which is then exploited through psychological tactics, weaponized fear, easily manipulated memory, societal division.
And now managed at an unprecedented scale by these digital systems that don't even see us as individuals anymore, but as dividuals, as data aggregates to be predicted and steered.
The entire system, combining all these layers, seems almost designed to cultivate a certain kind of person. Anxious, distractible, seeking safety from authority, whether that's a government or just the algorithm feeding you comforting lies.
So for you, the listener, hearing all this, understanding how easily perception and memory can apparently be manipulated, how narratives are constantly being spun by forces seen and unseen, what's the defense? How do you stop your reality from being hijacked?
Well, the sources don't offer easy answers, but one practical takeaway, borrowed from memory experts actually, is cultivating a kind of deliberate skepticism about your own mind.
Don't trust your brain. That sounds difficult.
It means recognizing its fallibility. Assume you will forget details. Assume your perspective will be influenced by later information. So the practice is write things down. Record your initial thoughts, feelings, observations about an event before you talk to anyone else about it, before you consume news coverage, before the collective narrative starts to form and potentially overwrite your own perception.
That first, raw, uninfluenced take is the anchor.
It's perhaps the closest you can get to securing your own viewpoint in a world saturated with attempts to shape it. It's about consciously preserving your primary data before the noise sets in.
So the final thought we want to leave you with is this. Now that you've glimpsed the architecture of control, what concrete steps, however small, are you actually taking starting right now to safeguard your own perception?